All right, guys, happy Thursday. Seller listing mastery, building a repeatable model for seller representation. We are on I want to say seven. Yeah, I want to say we're on week seven. We're on week seven of this series. It has been a great series where we've talked about so many different topics regarding building a listing based business, right? Not that we only work with sellers, not that we, avoid buyers, but we learn how creating a listing based business can create so much leverage for us, can help us grow our business, and can help us really just build a model around a sustainable business, creating more certainty, right? Even in our lead gen. So, for those of you who I have not had a chance to meet before, I see some new faces, but of course, a lot of familiar faces. Good to see everybody coming in. But for those who I have not had a chance to meet before, my name is Ray Cole Jackson. I'm a South Florida real estate and finance attorney. I am essentially you, 10X. I love all things real estate, just like you. A little bit about me personally, my background. I am originally from Florida, like many of you, and I attended the University of Florida for undergrad. Oh, let's see here. Let's make sure we get some. Let's get some. Make sure we mute everybody, Rihanna. Um, Went over to California where I got my law degree, focused in real estate there, was the founder of the Real Estate Law Society. Came back home to Miami, got my LLM in real property development, licensed in Florida and Georgia as a realtor and loan officer. So we just love all things real estate over here. We just love absolutely all things real estate. With that being said, I am a co-founder of Purchase Ready, and Purchase Ready it's an ecosystem for realtors to help you build the business behind the agent. Our motto at Purchase Ready is one guided path from learning to closing. One guided path from learning to closing. And how do we accomplish that? We accomplish one guided path from learning to closing by teaching realtors who are a part of the community um, about all the different features, all the different professions, all the different services that are impacting your transaction. So one guided path from learning to closing. Where we're obviously talking about purchase and sale transactions, right? We're talking about the lending process. We're talking about the title and escrow process. And then during our office hours and off schedule, we talk about other items such as marketing and other items that support your business. But ultimately, the goal of Purchase Ready and the ecosystem that has been built around you is to give you one guided path from learning to closing. As I learned this, of course, ultimately, information, we want you to implement it, right? So from learning to closing, learn more to earn more was previously our motto, and it still is. But one guided path. We expect you to come in, learn the transaction process, learn about lending, and then, of course, make your way over to title and escrow to closing. And we are absolutely confident that we can do that with you. So, how do you partner with us? If you've not had an opportunity to get more information about the different services that are available to the Purchase Ready ecosystem, I would love to chat with you. Just send me an email. On the screen is the at purchaseready.com. You can email me direct as well, raycole at purchaseready.com. If you call the office, they'll take a message and schedule a call with me. But generally, most of you have come in through the academy and learned about the different services. And so if you still have questions, just feel free to reach out. All right. All right. With that being said, let's get today's handout. Let's get today's handout, labhandout.com. Labhandout.com. All right. Labhandout.com. Let's see here. Hold on one second. Why do I see here? Oh, here we are. So today's discussion, Florida Seller Disclosures 101. Florida Seller Disclosures 101. Why is this thing ringing? What must be disclosed? What must be in writing? And which forms are actually required? All right. So we've already grabbed our handout. So here's the deal. The today's discussion, I don't anticipate it will take us a ton of time to hit this, but as we are discussing the listing, building a business on listings, of course, we're starting from the beginning to the end. We've gone from why a listing based business to the, we've talked about CRM, we've talked about valuations, we've talked about the listing appointment, and now we've talked about we talked about the listing agreement last week. Now we're going to assume you got that listing. You got the listing. You got the listing. Hey, good to see you. You got that listing. And now let's assume that you are preparing to go to market with that listing. And so your next step, along with getting the listing agreement executed, is going to be getting your disclosures executed. One of the things we're going to talk about is the disclosures. Having the disclosures executed is not something that you should be thinking about after going on the contract. This is part of getting your listing ready to launch. That's going to be a class all by itself about launching the listing, but this is part of that, which is getting your disclosures executed. Now, two great myths that we want to dispel today at the head of our discussion is or are the I hear often that the seller's disclosure, the common seller's property disclosure that you guys hear about, that is required, that the form itself is required. That's not true. That is not true. And I know many of you think that it is because your brokerage requires it, but that's a brokerage requirement, and not the handout. Give her the link to the handout, Rihanna, labhandout.com. The requirement is simply that you disclose. The requirement is not that you provide the seller's property disclosure specifically, right? Also, the idea that because you're using the as is contract, the seller does not have to disclose defects. That is also not true. That is also not true. Let me type this in. That is also not true. The as is contract, as compared to the contract for residential sale and purchase, the CRISP is the acronym. So the CRISP versus the as is, the difference with the CRISP is from the outset, the seller has agreed to make specific repairs. That's the difference with the CRISP versus the as is simply says, I am not going to make repairs. It does not mean I can't disclose latent defects with the property or material defects that you're not able to identify. I'm just simply not required to make those repairs. All right. So those are the first few foundational concepts. Number one, the seller's disclosure form is not required by law. Your brokerage may require it, and that's fine, but it is not, the form itself is not required by law. Secondly, by virtue of using the as is contract does not absolve the seller of disclosing issues with the property. It absolves the seller of being required to make repairs because the CRISP, the other form of the purchase and sale contract that is not commonly used, but it is available, the CRISP, the contract for residential sale and purchase, it starts from a place of the seller agreeing to make repairs. All right? All right. So we're going to go over the three main categories of disclosures that you are expected to provide, that your seller is expected to provide at closing. We've categorized them as three different categories. So first, the universal statutory mandates. This applies to almost all residential properties, right? Almost all residential properties have these disclosure requirements. Then there are some disclosure requirements that are specific to the property. It's going to be triggered based upon the property type. And then lastly, we're going to discuss the commonly known seller's disclosure. That's Form SPDR4. All of these forms are in the handout. If you go to labhandout.com, that's what's in there. right? As well as the usual synopsis of the forms. So just in case someone has not laid eyes on these disclosures before, they are in the handout, right? So let's start with the foundational law regarding disclosure. We've discussed this before, so if you've heard it before, here's a reminder. If you've not heard it before, you're learning today. The seminal case, the foundational case regarding disclosure in Florida for residential transactions is the Florida Supreme Court case Johnson v. Davis. Johnson v. Davis is the case that established the seller's requirement to disclose known hidden facts that significantly affect property value. Known hidden, also known as latent, meaning I would not be able to identify these issues with a standard or traditional inspection of the property. Again, simply because the seller does not have to execute the form does not absolve them of their requirement, their legal obligation to disclose issues that they know to exist with this property that nobody would be able to know had they not, had you not disclosed it. So, what are the requirements? The seller must have actual knowledge about the issue, right? They're not required to go make inspections, they're not required to go find issues, but if they have actual knowledge of an issue, we've met the first requirement. Does it materially impact the property? The defect must be significant enough that it affects like structural roof leaks, not just cosmetic issues with the property. Like paint is peeling. Like we see the paint is peeling, right? Hidden from view. I just said we can see that. We can see that issue. If we did just a cursory standard inspection, we can identify that issue. And then lastly, unknown to the buyer. If the buyer is already fully aware of the issue, then there's no reason to disclose. But if the buyer is not aware, then you have to disclose. So what is some difference? Let's say, for example, there's a uh, car. They backed into the side of the house. And you can see that. As soon as you pull up to the property, you can see that clearly someone backed into the garage. That does not require disclosure, right? That is not latent. That is not subsurface. That is not something that you can't visually see. But what about mold? You know, you know that there's mold in the property. Not that there's likely mold. You know that there is mold because you know that there was a leak. You know that the leak was not repaired. That it never was repaired properly. And if you get a good rain, hurricane season, that leak is probably still leaking, right? That is something that must be disclosed. That is something that must be disclosed to the seller. Now, the form of disclosure, again, we have a standard form. That is the seller's disclosure form. It's in your handout. It doesn't necessarily have to be on that form, but that is the best form to utilize because it's going to be the best way to say that, to prove that the buyer was told about this issue. Because you do realize that what is the buyer's remedies in the event that they purchase this property, they close, and they say, wait a minute, there's mold in here. And based upon the mold remediator's inspection, they said that this clearly has been an issue since for about 2 years. We just closed. We're gonna sue the sellers, and they can. Duty to disclose survives closing. Let me make that clear. There are some other issues in here. We're going to talk about HOA condo that as soon as once you close, then the buyer can't go back and make a claim. But this here, it survives closing. Additionally, you should know that the agent also has a duty to disclose when they are aware of an issue. So one of the examples I commonly use for you guys is if, for example, let's say, for example, this is a table, not a desk, but a table, and huge table, 12, it seats 12. It's a beautiful table. It sits atop a beautiful Italian rug. You meet me at the property for the listing appointment. And we're having a discussion about the property, and you're going to list it, and we start talking about what can stay. And as we are going over it, you pull out your pen, and pen drops out of your hand, rolls under the table. And I say, let me get my grabber because I don't want you to fall through the floor. And you're like, what? Fall through the floor? Oh, it's nothing. It's a we have a little kind of, my husband jokes that it's a sinkhole, but it's not. It's a little small hole. Like you won't fall through. The dog probably will, but you won't. But it's fine. Nobody even knows. See, you didn't even know. The rug, the desk, I mean the table, nobody will even know. And you say, okay. And the table, the dinner table and the rug, let's just sell it with the property. Nobody will ever know. Again, it's fine. Only a little chihuahua can fall through, not a big dog. It's a small dog. It's fine. It's fine. It's the tile. We have tile over it. It's fine. It'll be okay. Duty to disclose. You and the seller. You and the seller. Now let's recap. What if same scenario, but they never told you what the issue was? They was like, let me grab my grabber. Don't worry about it. Let me get it for you. Let me get the pen for you. You don't just let me get it. No, that's fine. It's fine. It's fine. That's why I have the grabber here. It's a big table, and I want you to crawl on your nice pants. I'll grab it for you. And then all of a sudden, you get served with a complaint because you were the agent for the seller that never told the buyer that there's a sinkhole covered by tile under the dining room table and an Italian rug that conveniently was included in the sale. Well, you're not liable because you didn't know, right? But if the facts can prove that the seller knew, the seller's liable, right? So only the seller should fill out the form. You should never answer the questions for the seller. The seller is literally to fill out this form to the best of their knowledge. They're not required, again, they're not required to go investigate anything, just to the best of their knowledge, right? If they don't know, just say I don't know or not applicable, right? But the purpose of the document is to document that the disclosure was made regarding an issue with the property. Similarly, for a buyer, it documents for the buyer that the seller did or did not tell them about a condition with the property. And if there is found to be an issue with the property, the buyer can rely on that. So again, before we move on from this form, a couple points of clarification. This is not statutorily required, this particular form. Your brokerage may require it, and that's fair. Um, Even if the brokerage doesn't require it, I've seen buyer's agents who represent the buyer add into the additional term section that the seller will complete a seller's disclosure within 2 days after the effective date of the contract. If the seller agrees to provide the disclosure, now they are contractually obligated to provide that disclosure. All right. All right. And that makes sense too. So a comment in the chat is Hansel's brokerage, good afternoon, has a requirement that no seller disclosure forms for sellers who never lived in the property. That's similar to banks, right? And investors in REO properties. They tell you that I don't know anything about this property. As far as the condition of it, we acquired it through foreclosure. Whatever it is what it is, right? And that's fine. And so in that particular situation, if it's important to that buyer that they have a disclosure, they got to move on. They got to move on because this seller is not agreeing to provide the disclosure. Now, again, that does not, just because, I'll use the same example, the seller has never lived in the property, but you were made aware of it. You became aware of the issue by virtue of your listing agent and you verified it. You know now that there is a sinkhole under the tile. You can't just say, we don't give sellers disclosures. No, no, you can't say that. You can say you don't do the form, possibly, but you have to disclose. All right. Make sure we're clear on that. So that's the general rule in Florida based on Florida Supreme Court law or case law that a seller must disclose issues, known issues with the property that are not apparent to a buyer. And you, as a realtor, if you're aware of them, you also have to disclose. And this is also in your purchase and sale agreement, too, guys, that this provision survives closing. All right. So, what are some of the disclosures that are triggered by the property type? Most of you, we all know the lead-based paint disclosure, right? Pre-1978 construction, you are required to disclose that using the standard disclosure form. We're going to talk about the HOA and condo disclosure. And then in your contract is also a coastal construction line requirement when the property is seaward of the coastal line. These are our most common one. This is least common, but it is in your purchase and sale contract. And obviously we are in Florida, so duh. It's something that you should absolutely be aware of, right? So the lead-based paint disclosure, the seller has to disclose any known lead-based paint hazards. They need to provide any available reports that they have, providing the EPA-approved pamphlet to the buyer. And then it gives the buyer a 10-day window to investigate whether or not the paint is in fact lead-based and there are any hazards thereby, right? It doesn't require the seller to test the house. It only requires the seller to disclose what they already know. This is an easy one. And this one, if you guys look at the template, it requires also that the agents, along with the buyer and seller, execute the form. This one I feel like you can't miss. This one is in the writer's inventory at the end of the contract. That's one thing I like about the way our contract is drafted. All the standard addendums are there on the page, what, 11, 12? And if you just run your eye down them, you should be able to quickly determine, okay, yes, this is relevant to my property or my property slash transaction. This is not, this is not. So you really should not miss them. Similarly, the HOA and condo disclosures. These are important. I don't see you guys miss these as much as what I would say you want to be careful about, particularly with the condo association rider, is the information not being inputted correctly, right? So I've seen situations where the HOA rider wasn't included, but it wasn't included because and for example, in the last particular transaction, it was vacant land, similar to what we just talked about. I think the owners they inherited it. They never lived in the property, did anything with the property, not lived. It was vacant land, and they just did not know there was an association. Um, File was sent in for closing. Title commitment was ordered. What came up on the title commitment as a requirement? HOA estoppel. HOA estoppel means you need to provide disclosure. Providing disclosure means you're about to tell them what the association's requirements are, which generally also includes some fee. If the buyer's being petty and they're like, they were trying to get out the deal anyway, and they're like, oh, got them. I am not interested in paying $3 every 30 years. Nope, nope, nope. Cancel me now. Right? That is one of the biggest risks that you run with incorrect timing and incorrect information in these disclosures, because the buyer can cancel up to, on an HOA rider, if you miss providing it and the information is incorrect, up to 3 days prior to close. 3 days, they have up to 3 days prior to closing or the date of closing, whichever comes first, right? So if they get it 2 days before closing, they can cancel that 2 days before. If they get it the day of closing, they can close the day before. If they get it 4 days before closing, then their deadline is that 3 days before closing. Condo. You guys know that the condo disclosure is just way more exaggerated than it was in prior years. This is a class all by itself, going through that form, which is now almost 3 pages. It's about 3 pages. You want to make sure that you do not mess this up. right? Because the buyer has the same opportunity to cancel the contract if this information is not provided timely and correctly. All right. The last thing I'll say is I've actually had a transaction cancel because of the HOA rider information. So they got the information late and they canceled. And it was a situation where they literally wanted to cancel and it worked out in their favor. Surprise, surprise. So dot your I's, cross your T's. Again, this is not something I would say to you guys, this is not something that should be an issue because as we talked about when we started, these forms, the HOA rider, the condo rider, the seller's disclosure, if it's a brokerage requirement, we're going to talk about the flood disclosure. All of those forms, guys, they should be in the MLS. Place them in the MLS and make it a requirement that they be included in any offer, right? That the buyer executed versions of those disclosures be included with your offer so that should your seller accept that offer, the disclosures are already done. The clock is already ticking on the condo timeline, right? Clock is already ticking on HOA timeline, right? Lead-based paint, clock is already ticking. So again, as we talk about building this system, this is part of your system. Now, remember we said that the other category was the universal standard statutory mandates. This is associated with essentially every property. Every residential property is going to have this requirement. I would say about 2 years ago, we have now the mandatory flood disclosure. It requires a seller to disclose info regarding past floodings. Of course, we're in Florida. What? Hurricanes, right? So it specifically asks about whether or not the property there's been a filing, a flood insurance claim, whether you know about any flooding on the property. You have to disclose that because that's going to impact the new owner. And again, that template is also in the handout. These disclosures, radon gas, the property tax information, these are built into your purchase and sale contract. Remember, I told you guys that when I teach you the contracts, there's a section in the contract that is just disclosures. It is straight disclosures. And it generally doesn't change, right? So I teach you that when you're learning the as is contract, there's really only about 4 pages, 5 at the most, where you need to add information that's specific to the transaction. But the other section of that contract, once you learn the language, it is static language. It does not change. And one of those sections is the disclosures. And I describe that section for you guys as be it known. Be it known. Okay, buyer, you need to know that this property, radon, this is the language that it says. Radon is a naturally occurring gas. Seller makes no representations regarding the existence of radon gas. You are encouraged to get your own test. Oddly enough, at closing on a finance transaction, most lenders include a radon gas disclosure in the buyer's closing package. So they sign the same disclosure. Radon is a naturally occurring gas. We've not done any testing on this property to determine whether or not radon is existing. You need to test the property yourself, right? The other built-in disclosure is regarding property taxes. You guys know, many buyers don't know that the property taxes that are used at closing to estimate what next year's taxes are going to be, probably wrong. Why? Because there's going to be an adjustment to the value of the property based upon this sale. Many of you've probably seen on the news where there's discussions about buyers of new construction properties getting hit with a huge tax bill their first year after closing because the taxes that were used in their loan underwriting were land value taxes. Taxes is nothing, a couple $100. That's nothing. Versus taxes now with a structure on it through the roof. So you have people that are paying literally almost $1,000 sometimes, $600 per month more than they anticipated paying because their tax bill has adjusted. So that is that specific verbiage, of course, that specific example is not in the purchase and sale contract, but that disclosure is made to the buyer that way. Also, the energy efficiency um, brochure. I always joke about this one. This is also built into the contract. Some of you have said that this brochure is in your, I guess your hub of documents to provide to the buyer. Many of you are like, I've never even heard of it, but this disclosure is built into the purchase and sale contract. The buyer is saying, I've received the energy efficiency brochure. It's a mandatory disclosure. Now, I equate this, and when they sign that contract, they're saying that they've received it, and oftentimes, unfortunately, many of them have not. So I equate this to like the HIPAA disclosure when you go into the doctor's office and they give you that clipboard with a single sheet of paper, having you say that you received the HIPAA disclosure and you did not. Well, I'm that one that'll go back and say, excuse me, I need my disclosure. Stop doing that because you didn't give it to me. But in any event, now you guys will do it too. They give you that clipboard. Read the papers, people. Anyway, the standalone mandate regarding the flood disclosure, again, under section 689.302, sellers must now provide a specific flood disclosure answering 3 statutory questions: whether or not they have knowledge of damage to the property due to a flood, whether or not they filed a claim, and whether or not they received assistance for flood damage in the past. Again, because it impacts the property. So that's what that form provides for, and that's required in every transaction. We just talked about the fact that these 3 disclosures are built into the contract regarding property taxes, rate on gas, energy efficiency. There's some others in there. Mold is in there. I don't have them all committed to memory, but that whole section is just be it known, buyer. Here's all the different disclosures to you. Now, what does not have to be disclosed? I get this question sometimes. The seller is not legally required to disclose non-material facts, such as whether a homicide, suicide, or any other death occurred on the property. Also, whether or not any of the prior occupants were positive for HIV or AIDS. That does not require, you do not have to disclose that. Something that is a personal preference of the buyer to know that something like that happened is not the same as a legal obligation, right? So, and when a buyer, if they ask that question, don't invent the answer. Don't assume you don't have the information. You likely don't. I don't have information on that, and that's not a legally required disclosure of the seller, right? Because it does not materially impact the property itself, right? So what occurred at the property, unless it impacts the physical property, that disclosure is not required, right? I can't say that I've ever gotten that question or anyone told me that they've been asked that question specifically, but it comes up, so it's important for you all to know that. Like, that is not something that must be disclosed. All right. So, with that being said, some of the main points, the final point to know with regards to this disclosure is that, as you can see, all of these disclosures need to occur at or before the time that the contract is executed. So again, for that reason, let's go ahead and create a system around having these documents executed before you get an offer, before you go into contract, right? And then, of course, you should know that the seller has an ongoing duty to disclose material defects in the property. So let's say, for example, using our same hypothetical that we talked about with the sinkhole. At the listing appointment, there was nothing. There was nothing. And then all of a sudden, when they were doing, spring cleaning, they moved the dining table and the rug to have it cleaned. And what is this in the floor. This tile is sinking. Well, thank God we're selling it. Cover, put that back, put it back, put it back. Thank God we're getting out of here. Closing in 2 weeks. Let's go. Put that back. Thank you. Uh-uh. Have an ongoing duty to disclose that, right? So, what is your lesson for today? Obviously, you now know about the various forms. Again, for those of you who have your brokerage has the requirement that at the very least the seller's disclosure must be completed, not at the very least, like in addition to your other mandatory disclosures, you want to make sure that you have those forms on hand, that they are executed once the listing agreement is executed, and you may decide, you know, we're not gonna do that listing appointment. We'll do it when I go back out for photos, right? That's fine. But have that done before you go under contract for sure. And again, you should place them in the MLS, I would recommend, and you make it a requirement. Put in your broker comments, any offer to purchase must include buyer executed lead-based paint disclosure, flood disclosure, seller's disclosure, HOA rider, and you have your checklist, and you don't accept an offer without that being completed, right? You definitely want to make sure that you document that the documents have been provided. We know that on the condo rider that there is a section for you to document that the required documents have been provided to the buyer. So you want to make sure that that goes out. And then, of course, like we said, it's an ongoing process to disclose if there's any issues with the property. So here's just a quick overview of what we discussed, the different disclosures. General disclosure, there is a mandatory duty to make a disclosure of known latent defects, things that a buyer cannot see on the property, just in general, anything going on with that property, mold behind the walls, hole under the table that anybody cannot see, you have to disclose it. You have to disclose it. And of course, the recommendation is to use the standard form. Flood, we have a form for that. Lead-based paint, we have the form for that. HOA condo riders, you know that we have a form for that. The CCCL, the coastline disclosure, that's in the contract. Property tax radon, that is built into the contract. So your most important disclosures are those that are not built into the contract, right? And remember, don't miss it. Don't miss it because the seller's relying on you. The seller's relying on you to ensure that they make all of their required disclosures, right? Because if they don't, and there is an issue with the property, and they're like, well, I told Peter not to crawl under the table because it was a sinkhole. I told him that. Peter's like, this is the last listing in America. We're going to sell this property. And if they're sued, they're going to come back and say, you didn't tell me that. Like, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. So that's another thing to take into consideration. The seller is relying on you to make sure that they make the appropriate disclosures. All right? All right. So, final three takeaways. Johnson v. Davis is much broader than just the checkbox that are on the disclosure form. The disclosure form is exhaustive in and of itself, but in case it missed something, and you know that it missed something, the seller has to disclose that. The as-is contract does not absolve the seller of disclosing defects with the property. They got to tell what they know. Just because it's as-is does not mean, oh, well, figure it out. As you wanted to buy the table and the rug, you should have figured out that there was a chihuahua size hole under the table. It's on you, right? No, that's not where we are. And then lastly, make sure that we build our system around not missing any required disclosures, right? Let's have all of our we know the ones that are mandatory. We should just go ahead and have those on deck and then utilize the addendum inventory at the end of the contract for just a reminder of what else is triggered, what other disclosures are triggered by virtue of the property type. All right. All right. Um, any questions? I told y'all that won't take long. We did very good on that one. They're very good. Any questions? I saw that. I saw that. I saw that. The owner feels like the condo writer. Yes. Yes. Yep. All right. It's pretty straightforward, right? That wasn't painful. I like to do non-painful stuff. I hate to be the bearer of bad news on most times, but that wasn't painful. Just a reminder, if you do have any follow-up questions, join us during office hours. We are there Monday through Friday, 10:30 to 11. It's not a power hour, it's a power half hour. We get in and we get out today. I think we might be, I don't want to speak too soon, but we've been having conversations around again the listing appointment, particularly around value. And I'll share this really quickly in the last well, we actually have a couple minutes, but I want to hit this for those who have not attended our office hours around pricing, because this is a big conversation right now. The conversation we've been having over the last 2 days, guys, as it relates to marketing your listings, and the question that comes up often is, how do I market this listing? And I'm going to be very direct, not backdoor. You have questions around how to market an overpriced listing. How do I market this? I'm not getting any offers. Well, you're probably not getting any offers because you're overpriced, right? So the concept that we've discussed over the last 2 days was the price is the marketing. The
Hmm.
price is the marketing. One last time, the price is the marketing. So just because you take, and we use this example, you have a gallon of milk is $5 all day long, and you go and market your gallon of milk for $15 just because you put a red bow on it. What does, I mean, how? How did that increase the value of this gallon of milk just because you put a bow on it? The price is the marketing, right? It's not to say that you should have a budget sale, a discount sale, but that's why people market their price. You can get this for $4.99. If I market one of the things that we discussed is, if your property is overpriced, it doesn't matter how many open houses you host with the best food, you can do the best photography, the best cinematic videos, it's overpriced, right? The price is the marketing. So we talked about that, and we kind of just really hit on the fact that as real estate professionals, particularly when you go into your listing presentation, again, this part and parcel with our content for the month. When you go into your listing presentations, guys, 75% of that conversation needs to be on, we must make sure that we hit the right price, because the price is the positioning. If we don't hit the right price, what ends up happening? We sit on the market, for too long. We start getting our days on market climbs, and the property, what do we call it? It gets stale. And when we have long days on market and it gets stale, then there's a perception of something must be wrong with this property. Clearly, something's wrong with it. The first thing they're gonna look at is price, right? Something is wrong with this property that it hasn't sold. And then the next step is, when you have that perception, now you're negotiating from a place of weakness. How many of you have seen where you see the joke that's like, oh, you've been on the market for 90 days and what did it say? Multiple offers. Stop it. You do not have multiple offers and you've been on the market for 90 days. Just stop it. Stop it. Right? So the price is the marketing. So we have an obligation to, number one, make sure that we know how to price properties properly. And then secondly, how to have a conversation around price properly, so that we can do what we're hired to do, which is sell the property, move inventory, right? So that's just a little recap of the last 2 days of what we discussed during office hours. And again, those who need a little bit more need some support around pricing, getting stronger on pricing. Number one, number two, getting stronger on having the pricing conversation. Jump in office hours, because again, we have a very good, robust discussion, and Nick leads us most times on that. All right. If you don't have the training calendar synced to your calendar, you can do that using this QR code. If you're not getting text messages, reminders, we all know that it could be on the calendar and you still forget. This is your QR code. The recording of today's training and all of our previous trainings are hosted on our YouTube page. If you utilize this QR code, it will take you to our YouTube page. You should subscribe and, of course, like, so that you will get notified every time that the class is posted. And then lastly, if you enjoyed today's session, we would enjoy a 5-star Google review. All right, we're gonna build up our Google page. All right, you're welcome. All right, guys, we did good. This was short and painless, right? This didn't hurt too bad. This didn't hurt too bad, right? All right. Good to see everybody. Good to see you, Ediani. Good
Thank
to
you.
see everybody. You're welcome. Good to see everybody. All right, guys. See some of y'all in the morning. See the rest of y'all next week. Bye.
Enjoy your
Bye.
afternoon.
Thank
Bye. Thank
you.
you. Thanks, Rihanna.